getting fired, and Doc Rivers becoming the new head coach to fill in the position of the head coaching role for the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks, as I've mentioned several times before, they're the second seeded team in the East. One of the teams to beat in the Eastern Conference. You definitely cannot go far without making sure that you topple those guys and beat those guys. Firing their head coach at this point in the season with how they've been playing was a little bit surprising, but it definitely shows that the Bucks record is positive right now, and it's very, very positive compared to everybody else in the East. They're way ahead of the pack in terms of win percentage, and the only other teams that are competing against them are the 76ers and the Boston Celtics. There are several sources saying that he was fired because he made some really bad comments about Giannis, wanting him to get cut and not thinking that he's worthy of a roster spot. not thinking that he's worthy of a roster spot on the Bucks. Now, if you want to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo, you need to make sure that you keep his family happy as well. So if you're out insulting his brother, he is not going to take that lightly whatsoever. Giannis's brother is a fan favorite, so not only that, but he's Giannis's brother. If you don't keep his brother happy, then you don't keep Giannis happy. And if you don't keep Giannis happy, then you're asking for a lot of problems going into the season and going into your job. Not to mention, you are his coach. And saying things to other people like him not deserving the roster spot is just disrespectful, because you're his coach. You are supposed to be the player to make him better. So if you're not doing that and you're just out here throwing his name out and saying like he's some sort of scrub, that's just an insult to your job. And there's no need for him to do that. Sources have also said that he lost the locker room a while ago. So it's impressive to me that the team was able to keep their head up and continue being a top 2 team and being this very explosive basketball team that they really are. Even with like all of the locker room problems that they were having, and with all the problems that they had with their coach, they've still maintained their composure and they've still been able to focus on the rest of the season, which is honestly like the more impressive part in my personal opinion, because it's very difficult to play basketball against all of these teams, be a top 2 team, and be competing without having a proper coach and without having the right pieces to the puzzle, I guess you could say. So Doc Rivers, as I mentioned before, he is going to be the head coach that finally takes this coaching spot and replaces the guy who they fired. I don't like this move personally, but that's also because I'm not a big fan of Doc Rivers or his coaching, especially come playoff time. I personally think that the coaching from Doc Rivers in the playoffs gets very stale and very basic. Nothing he does is different from what he does in the regular season, which is a big problem when you are in the playoffs, because most teams usually try to adapt to what you do on the offense. They try to force their defense to make it so that way you cannot do the things that you normally would do on offense in the regular season. Not only that, but he is also responsible for blowing the most 3-1 leads in NBA history and the most leads in playoff history. That would be any lead. 2-0, 3-2, all those type of leads he has blown. Every single time he's been fired or he's lost his job, the team has ended up, it's mainly because the team has ended up coming short of the postseason, and that's how he's lost a majority of his jobs. He recently lost his job with the Clippers because they couldn't make it far in the postseason, or as far as they believed that they should have. then he also lost his job with the Philadelphia 76ers because they also came up short when they believed that they should have made it a lot farther in the postseason. But what else can you do when Doc Rivers is your head coach? Which is why, in my personal opinion, I don't see this as a good move by them. I'm afraid that this exact same pattern of always ending up coming short in the postseason is going to continue to repeat itself every single time. And I feel like this is going to happen with the Bucks. Now, even though they are a strong team and their coach wasn't popular in the locker room before, they've shown that they don't necessarily need a strong coach in order to be a solid team. However, come playoffs, I believe that is going to hinder them a lot when they go up against teams that do have a coach that can make these adjustments. I think this might hold the team back now, in terms of substitutions and in adjustments, as I mentioned before. So having a coach that hinders all of that, then again, maybe it might be an upgrade, and I might only just be looking at the negatives because it is Doc Rivers, but he did lose the locker room, so there might be a possibility that he did not have the right adjustments down anyway, the head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks. So Doc Rivers is the only coach I can see messing up any lead in the playoffs, however. And this honestly might be what Joel Embiid needs in order to make it past the second round. He needs to match up against the Bucks and just hope to God that Doc Rivers finds a way to mess this up. He's done it several times before, and I understand changes that need to be made. Having a coach that doesn't have the locker room on their side is already bad news. The change needed to happen, but I wish they got a different coach for the job. It wasn't a bad pick, obviously. He'll get you to the second round. It's just past that is the bigger question, in my opinion. And he's had that reputation of struggling, and it's not healthy having that as your culture now behind your head coach, being notorious for struggling in the second round. When he left the Clippers, they got farther without him. When he was with the 76ers, they continued to blow leads. His coaching mainly comes from how good his players can play while they're in the postseason. So that's it's very iffy with some of these players because you have to rely on their consistency, and when they're not consistent, it's shoot, what do you do now? I personally don't think this brings much of a benefit to a team that's already been winning. I feel like maybe they should have stuck it out with their head coach until maybe the All-Star break, but I guess the change needed to happen now. Even with their new head coach, this is a great team, second in the East right now. They might need to worry about the Sixers coming up. They already have to worry about the Celtics, but the Sixers right now, seeing as they have a lot better chemistry with their coach and the roster that they have, I think might be a much bigger threat than the Milwaukee Bucks, assuming that the coaching and adjustments takes a minute to get settled in, because if we remember with what happened with the Clippers, James Harden came in, everyone thought that they were going to perform immediately. They played 5 games, and in those 5 games, they lost in embarrassing fashion, and a lot of teams immediately already wrote them off. But afterwards, and after those 6 games, they ended up winning a bunch of those games, a bunch of the rest of the games, including the one that I'm going to talk about in the next segment, but more on that later. It isn't All-Star break yet, so there's no need for the Bucks to panic. Like I said before, even with the problems in the locker room, it didn't really seem to affect them at all too much. So having a coach that doesn't give you those problems is always a boost. They're still winning these games that they needed to win. While some of them might have been closer than what they needed to be or what you expect from this Bucks team, it's still a win. So it's totally fine, especially with the standings. In fact, let's go ahead and talk about the Eastern Conference and the standings. The only team right now that stays a major threat is Boston and Philly. Cleveland and the Knicks are in the 4th and the 5th seed, but they're more like second round teams. They might go against each other in the first round, so it's inevitable that one of them makes it to the second round. But if they don't match up against each other, I could see both of them making it to the second round. I don't see them beating either of the top teams in the East, but I see them losing to any of the seeds that are below them or winning. It's either or. The Knicks recently beat Brooklyn in a close game. Brooklyn was the home team. Their trade with OG to bring him onto the squad after trading for him from the Raptors was definitely paying off on the defensive end, but I still don't think that it'll be enough for the top teams in the East. And not to mention, actually, you know what? I'll talk about that game a little bit later in my second segment. I'm not on the hype on the Pacers and Tyrese. They're a great team offensively, but the team on defense really scares me simply because they don't necessarily have that strength on defense. Their firepower is their offense. So if their offense isn't delivering, then chances are they're not going to have a good night. But that's the only thing that scares me about the Pacers. That's very important in the playoffs, having a very consistent defense. It's something a lot of the top dog teams in the East actually have already. They have two-way players, they have a great offense, and they also have a great defense. It's pretty scary to think how you could be winning and all of a sudden they still fire you with the Bucks head coach. So a lot of these coaches should probably watch out. Shows that there's much more to being a head coach than just winning games, which begs the question why Darvin Ham is still the head coach. He's been a lot of the Lakers' scapegoats and the reasons why they've been taking a lot of these losses. Only leading the Lakers to the in-season tournament finals is not enough for this team. They need to be ready for the postseason because you have to salvage the most of what you can with LeBron. And speaking of the Lakers, we've run out of time for this first segment, but we are going to go into the second segment where we talk about the Clippers and how they recently beat the Lakers in a very close game. Well, the scoreboard shows that it wasn't necessarily a close game, but it ended up being a pretty nice game, especially for Kawhi Leonard, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that in the next segment, and I'm going to acknowledge the comments in the next segment as well. So I